started to tip over. So what we're going to do today is we are going to pick up with approximately where we left off last week. There'll be a little bit of overlap. But these are some very, very important ideas that they're very hard to put into words because they are not, they do not come from words. They come from that place beyond words or the place before words. It's difficult to explain as something that we have to experience. And in the Wednesday night classes, we often talk about the experience of eating a chocolate bar. You can tell me with every word in the dictionary that's appropriate. You can try to explain to me what it's like to eat a chocolate bar. But you will not be able to communicate successfully to me what it is like. You might approximate it, but you will never capture it because there's something that cannot be explained and comprehended by the intellect. But there is a way of knowing that is different than the intellect, before the intellect. We can experience it, we can feel it, we can touch it, we can taste it. Now once we have that experience, the intellect goes to work to try to interpret that. And subsequently it fails. Not that the intellect is defective, but there's just some things that it cannot do. So these discussions that we are having, that we've been having for some time now, about experiencing the magnificence, as the mystics say, the satisfied delight of self-existence, experiencing the presence of the divine, experiencing the love of God. Please keep in mind that words are always going to fall short. It is not an intellectual exercise. God is not an intellectual exercise. God is not a mathematical problem to be solved. God is not a chemical formula to be understood. E equals mc squared may give us a way mathematically of understanding the interrelationship between energy and matter, but it is neither energy nor is it matter. It is a description of that which is. So what we are trying to do is bring a stem in a big bowl, like Sherlock Holmes might have used, and it's a painting of a tobacco pipe. And the saying underneath it is in French. It's a meme in French, and it says, "This is not a pipe. This is not a pipe." And we have to ask ourselves, well, if it's not a pipe, what is it? It looks like a pipe. It's got smoke coming out of it. It's got tobacco in it. It's a pipe. It's not a pipe. It's an artist's rendition of a pipe. The artist, perhaps gazing on a pipe or perhaps calling upon memory, took the elements of what a pipe represented to him and put them down on canvas. And in so doing, did it so accurately that we would look at it and say, well, that's a pipe. Yeah, that's a pipe. But then he wanted to call our attention to the fact that it was not, you see. We're not seeing a pipe. We're seeing an artist's rendition of a pipe, and then we are interpreting that through our own memory, our own knowledge, our own experience of tobacco pipes. Maybe our grandfather smoked a pipe. Maybe it brings back these memories. So the important thing there is that what is going on when we look at that pipe, or that painting of the pipe, is going on entirely within our consciousness, our individualized consciousness. That is where we experience everything. Even if we, for example, touch something and we feel it, right? The interpretation of what we are feeling is in consciousness. It is within our consciousness. So what we are trying to do is bring ourselves to the experience, to open ourselves, to surrender ourselves to that experience of the presence of the divine at all times, in all places, in all persons, in all things, to bring ourselves to that experience. And that is an experience that the intellect cannot fully interpret. This is why when we read the report, now keep in mind, just because the intellect can't doesn't mean that it won't try. It continuously tries and fails and comes up short. And this is why when we read the experiences of the different mystics, that they're confusing and it's hard to comprehend. And it's just magnificent. And there's light and there's love and there's peace, you see. And the intellect has trouble making sense of that, trouble putting that into words, because it is something that is beyond words. The experience of the chocolate bar is beyond words. How much more so is the experience of the presence of God. So I mention that because that is the ultimate for what we're talking about today. I realize that there's going to be more. You see, you and I are on this never-ending journey, this never-ending adventure of discovering just how magnificent the divine is, how beautiful, how wonderful, how kind, how loving. All of these words that the intellect tries to put to that which is beyond words. But we are trying to experience that. That is our destiny. That is what we are being driven towards, whether we like it or not. That is where we are going. And if we understand that, and if we understand that it is a feeling that is experienced, not an idea that is understood, but a feeling that is experienced, then we may be able to let go of some of the difficulty that we have in being stuck in the dream, okay? Being stuck in our heads, being stuck in our thoughts, being stuck in our own beliefs, our own opinions, our own prejudices, our own biases. Right? This is the way things are. This is the way things ought to be. This is the way things should be, and all of that is just an opinion, and very likely not the way things are. So this is why the Buddhism tells us that what we want to do is we want to see things as they are. We want to experience things as they are. Not as we think they are, not as we think they should be, but as they are. So the dream that we are having, is we are born into this world. We are born in these bodies, and we immediately start trying to interpret where we are and what is going on. Now, Buddhism gives us a beautiful, beautiful teaching story, and you can search for it on the web, and you will find different Buddhist teachers who have given different discourses about what this means and how to interpret it. And again, trying to use the intellect to point us to a place beyond the intellect. This is what is meant by walking the razor's edge. The intellect tells us that there is something that is before the intellect and beyond the intellect, and that we can get there, but when we get there, we have to leave the intellect behind. Again, from Buddhism, it's like taking the raft across the river. Once we get to the other shore, we leave the raft behind. We don't carry it around with us and tell everybody how beautiful our raft is. It's no longer useful. So the razor's edge tells us that we are walking a path. The intellect knows that there is a place where the intellect cannot go, and we are deliberately moving in that path. That's what we're trying to do. So the teaching story is about a monkey that is captured from the forest and placed inside a house, and it's locked in there. It cannot get out. And its only experience of the outside world of the forest where it used to live and play and you know, swing in the trees and eat and have fun. Its only experience now of that is through the windows. So the idea is that this monkey is captured in the forest and it is rendered unconscious somehow. You know, perhaps it falls asleep. Perhaps they give it a tranquilizer dart. But when it awakens on the floor of this house. And now it is trying to make sense. It's trying to interpret the world around it. It's trying to make sense. And it runs around from window to window and it's looking out at the forest where it used to be. But it can't get out. It's stuck. It's trapped inside this house, you see. And eventually what happens is the monkey becomes conditioned to the fact that it is living inside that house. And it might distract itself. Instead of trying to get back out of the house, get back out into the forest, it tries to distract itself by finding things within the house to occupy its attention, you know, maybe things to play with, things to take apart, you know. For a while, it might run from window to window and pine and wish that it could get back outside and try to get back outside. But after a while, it kind of becomes conditioned to the fact that it is stuck in that house. And that becomes its reality. That becomes its experience. And then it tries to figure out how to successfully live in that house, how to do the things that it needs to do to live in that house. And it becomes consumed with living in that house. And occasionally it might look out the window and think, isn't that nice? Isn't that pretty? But its desire to be back out in the forest is kind of hidden in the dream of being in the house, of being stuck in the house. So we are born into this world and we are born into these bodies and we have the windows of the five senses through which we interpret the world. And for the time we are born, perhaps before we are even born, when we are in the womb, we are trying to make sense of things, we are trying to interpret things. We hear voices, we hear songs, you know. They tell us it's good to sing to the unborn children, to play music for the unborn children. They can hear mommy and daddy's voice even before they're born and then recognize the same voice after they are born. So for the time we come into conscious awareness in these bodies, that is our experience, and we believe that that is the only experience. So we are like the monkey stuck in the house who has forgotten that there's an entire experience outside. There's an entire other experience. Now, of course, we have more than the five senses. You know, we are blessed with more than five senses, and we can get in touch with these things, and we can start to know things, and we can start to experience things that we experience that do not come to us through those five senses. We have intuition. We have knowing. So at some point, as we progress along the, I call it the maturation of consciousness, as our consciousness starts to grow and develop and mature, we start to become more and more interested in what is outside of the world of the physical, in the world of the spiritual. Then we start to turn our attention away from all that has held us captive, which is our belief in the reality of the physical experience. I'm not saying that we don't experience it. What I'm saying is it is not anything. It is not all that there is. It really has power of its own to create, right? And even though we experience it in the physical, we experiencing it through our consciousness. We start to realize that. See, life is about consciousness. What we are is conscious beings. We are conscious beings having an experience here in this world. And then we become really interested. The intellect becomes really interested in trying to find that path to move beyond the intellect. What is consciousness? Can you weigh consciousness? Can you touch consciousness? Can you measure consciousness? Where does consciousness come from? You know, all of these deeper questions of life that start to get us out of the daily routine. You know, we become so conditioned in doing the things that we need to do to live, and going to get a job, and going to get an education, and making money, and paying bills, and raising our families, and all of those things that we need to do, that we get so caught up in that we forget. We forget. So it is as if we are asleep and we are having a dream, and we believe the dream is real. And that happens to us almost every night, right? We go to bed, we close our eyes, we lose consciousness, and then somewhere during the course of the night, dreams occur. And as the dream arises, the objective part of us, the observer or the witness, is not functioning. And whatever is going on in that dream, we, at that moment in time, we believe it is real, and we act as if it is real. And if we are being chased by something dangerous, our heart will beat faster, and our breath will quicken. See, we cannot tell the difference between what is just purely a dream and what is. See, what is we are laying in bed asleep. But our consciousness is so engulfed in the dream that we can't tell that it's not reality. In fact, sometimes I wake up and I'll go through the day and I'll start to do something, and I'll remember something, and then I have to stop and say, well, did I really do that, or did I just dream that I did that? And I'll have to go physically check, you know, maybe I dreamt I put something away, and then I'll have to go look and see where I put it. See, is it really there? You know, it's not there. I just dreamt I put it away. So this ability to distinguish the dream, which is purely a condition of consciousness, from reality, is gone when we are asleep. It doesn't have to be. We're going to talk about that again in a minute. But it doesn't have to be. We then carry that over with us into the waking world. We get up, the clock goes off, the news comes on, the coffee pot goes off, we begin our day, we get in the car, we go to work, we get involved in all of the tasks of work. And we never consider that there's something else. See, we're in that dream we call work. We're in that dream, and that dream is so real to us that we never consider another possibility. We never look out the window of the soul into the beautiful forest of the conscious experience of the presence of the divine. So that's the dream. That's the dream that we're stuck in. And the question is, well, whose dream is that? Whose dream is it? Now, we each have our own dream. I'm not dreaming your dream, you're not dreaming my dream. We each have our own dream. And if we are to awaken from that dream, if we are to direct the course of the dream, then we are the only ones who can do it for ourselves. No one else can do it for us. We are the only ones who can do it for ourselves. We must have the intention to awaken. And then we must find a way to give our attention to the things that will help us to awaken. This is no different than anything else that you want to do in life. You want to learn how to play the guitar? Well, first you have to have the intention. You have to say, hey, I'm going to learn how to play the guitar. And then you have to give your attention to the things that you need to learn. You start watching today, you start watching videos on YouTube. You buy a guitar. You learn about the different types of guitars. You learn how to tune the strings. So you give your attention to doing the things that you need to do to awaken to the music within you, to the musical ability within you. Anything that you want to do in life is pretty much the same. What is your intention and what are you giving your attention to? Now, if you say it is my intention to play the guitar, and you give your attention to everything else under the sun, you're never going to be able to play that guitar. Right? You have to set your intention, but you have to follow it up by giving your attention to the things that require your attention in order to do the things that you need to do in order to have that experience of being a guitarist, a musician. So our intention then is to awaken from the dream. Now, how did we get in the dream? Who put us in the dream? Why are we here? All those are all good questions. And the best explanation that I can offer to you is that the divine being all and having all doesn't do anything out of need or necessity, as you and I do. We go to work because we need the money. I used to ask people that. If you had all the money in the world, would you still go to this job? Very few people said yes. Most said, are you crazy? The divine doesn't do anything out of need. So why does it do anything? And it does things then for the sheer delight, the satisfied delight of self-existence, for the sheer joy of expressing its own life and its own nature and discovering some aspect of itself through a unique, individualized personality, which is us. So it has created us out of itself as those vehicles, as those instruments of self-discovery, as those instruments of joy, as those individualized points of satisfied delight. But it had to leave us alone to make that discovery. If it created us in full knowledge of who and what we are, there would be nothing unique there, nothing different there. So in this regard then, we came into the world in a state of ignorance, into the world less than fully aware, less than fully awake of what we are. And we slowly discover that, you see. We discover that in our own unique way, in many different paths that we take, in many different practices in which we engage, we discover that. But that is our journey, you see. That is inevitable. That is our purpose. If you look at the evolution of life, life has always been moving forward with every iteration with a greater mobility and a greater intelligence, until it got to human beings who became capable of being self-aware. See, other creatures are aware, but we don't know that they are self-aware. We don't know that they can analyze their own thoughts, that they can create concepts. Buck tells us that one of the things that we look for is the development of language, because once we start thinking in concepts, we have to find a way to express that, and language is what naturally follows. So we become self-aware, you see, and that is the capability that we need to move into the next dimension, the spiritual dimension. Thomas Troward calls it the fifth kingdom. Right? We have the mineral, we have the vegetable, we have the animal, we have the human, and now we are stepping into the spiritual. But the step into the spiritual is in consciousness. The step into the spiritual is through our awareness and our self-awareness. We are the only creatures that we know of that are self-aware. And yet the thing that we spend the least time doing or being is self-aware. How many times we go through the day and we do all kinds of things, and at the end of the day we don't remember half of it. We weren't consciously there when we were doing it. So to awaken from the dream, we have to use the tool that we developed, which is self-awareness, to become aware of our own consciousness, and to become aware of the fact then that the things that are occurring in our consciousness are not real. They are not things unto themselves, but they are experiences of consciousness, and we can change that experience. We can set our intention to direct our attention to have a different experience. That is the one thing that you can do for yourself that no one else can do for you. And that is the one thing that you must do if you are to continue the evolutionary path, if you are to cooperate, if you are to consciously cooperate with the spiritual evolution that you are. It is through your awareness, through your intention, through your attention, through your practice. And that's why we have been talking about practice over and over and over again for the last month or so. Without that practice, everything else is just an intellectual exercise. It is a knowing about, but it is not a knowing. It might even be a feel-good about, but it is not the experience of the presence of the divine, the deeper experience of the presence of the divine. So this is by way of bringing us back to the point that says practice, 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 right? And again, if you want to play the guitar, you have to practice playing the guitar. You have to read music. You have to learn your scales. You have to figure out how to finger the frets. You have to do all of the things that a musician does until it becomes second nature to you. Practice. So what is it that we are trying to practice? We are trying to practice the presence of God. Brother Lawrence, little monk around the year 1300, he wanted to become a priest, but he didn't have the education, so instead they made him a brother, and they put him to work in the kitchen. And he became a mystic, and he wrote a little booklet called Practicing the Presence. And here, 700 or 800 years later, we don't remember anybody else's name who was in that monastery, but we remember Brother Lawrence because of his little booklet, still available today, 700 or 800 years in print, right? Practicing the presence. And what he learned how to do was, he had a little slogan that says, "Oh God of pots and pans and all things, let me see you in everyone and everything." Something like that, I'm paraphrasing. And he taught the others how to experience the presence of God. Now last week we talked about a simple technique of looking for the gaps in the breath. We breathe in, and there's a point where the breath is neither coming in nor going out. That is the gap. And then we breathe out. And there's a point where the breath is neither going out nor coming back in. And then it turns. And what we talked about doing last week was using the being connected to those gaps, being aware of those gaps, keeping it almost as a drone activity in the back of our consciousness. Excuse me, got a little something in my mouth. You know, on the bagpipes, they've got one or two pipes that are just, they're not played. There's no keys on them, and they just drone the same frequency, you know, over and over and over. And you can now you know that if you listen to the bagpipes, you can hear that. You know, you can hear it starts off with the drone, and then they start playing the tune. But the drone is always there, and that's what I mean by the drone activity. Our breath is always occurring, but we are not always aware of it. We are setting our intention, we are bringing our attention to the gap in the breaths. And of course this has a deeper meaning in that we are connected to all of life, and we are not aware of it because we don't bring our intention and our attention to it. And we are connected to all of life, and we are connected to the trees that give us the oxygen, And we are connected to the trees when we give them our carbon dioxide. So we start out by paying attention to the gap in our breath. And it awakens within us a deeper realization of our connection to life. So last week we said, take that as something that you can do all day long. Make it your practice all day long. Find the gap. Be in the gap. See? Be the gap. And what we find is that there's something, there's a stillness in the gap. The breath is neither coming in, the breath is neither going out, but also there's a gap in our thoughts, you see. We have a thought, or we observe a thought, and then there's a gap, and then there's another thought. Now, when we are stuck in the dream, we believe that we are having the thought. We believe that we are the thought. If it is an angry thought, we believe we are angry, you see. But as we learn to become the witness or the observer, we learn that we are the one observing the thought. We are the one observing the gap in the breath, you see. Now, during the day, we're breathing. What are you doing? I'm breathing. Who's breathing? Well, I'm breathing. I'm the one that's breathing. As we become the observer, breath is occurring. Breath is occurring. I am the one observing the breath. You see, so we're becoming detached from the reality of the dream. And we are becoming the observer. And this is very important because we believe in most of our life that we are the thoughts, the stream of consciousness. And at some point we begin to realize we never were that stream of consciousness, but we are the one observing that. So when we were little children, when you remember when you were 5 years old, you remember, a birthday party when you were 5 years old, when you played pin a tail on a donkey, and when you got presents. You remember that, see? But you're not the same person you were when you were 5 years old. You don't have the same body that you had when you were 5 years old. You're a completely different person than that 5-year-old. But the one who observed the 5-year-old, well, that's you. See, that's you. So our growth then is as we become identified with the observer. We awaken from the dream. We awaken from the dream. And we observe the dream. We observe the dreamer. And then we can direct it. We can choose which way it will go. So last week we said start with the gap, and this week what we're going to add to that is with devotion. With devotion, follow the gap and know the knower. Know the knower. That's what the sutra says. With devotion, follow the gap and know the knower. Now here's the subtle difference between what we started last week. See, devotion is love. Devotion is adoration. Devotion kind of indicates that there's something wonderful and unique and special that we are devoted to, It's a deep love, a deep love. As I said, when we start to breathe in and we recognize that breath is occurring and there's a gap, we suddenly can become aware of our connection to all of life, and the sacredness of all of life, and the sacredness of our own bodies. St. Paul said of God, who am I that thou art mindful of me? Who am I that this miracle of breath occurs? Every minute of every day, this miracle of breath occurs, and I have been so unaware of it most of my life. Yet here it is, see? What is the mind that created these magnificent lungs? What is the consciousness that created this synergistic system, whereas I and the trees, or my body and the trees, are two parts of a whole, you see? And now we start to feel, we start to experience the magic, the mystical moment of life, With devotion, can we love the Creator? With devotion, can we love the creation? Can we recognize just how magnificent life is and how wonderful it is that we can consciously participate in it? And to know the knower, to be one with the knower, is to be that witness, to be that observer, rather than just being caught up in the fact that I'm taking a breath. Breath is occurring, and breath is a miracle, you see? And it is in this connection, it is in this deep connection to ordinary things that we start to move out of our heads into the experience. When we eat, you see, when we eat, how wonderful is that? Our bodies take in the food and they know exactly how to process it and what to do with it. And the food was prepared by another, and it was grown by another, and it was harvested by another, and it was trucked by another. And through this meal, we are connected to all of humanity and all of life. So with devotion, if we observe the ordinary things, the gap in the breath, the gap between the thoughts, if we observe with devotion the process of eating, you see, then suddenly we become aware. We become aware of the experience. And it takes time, it takes practice, but it's something that you see, many times people say, I don't have time to practice. Well, you eat all the time. You breathe all the time. You have thoughts all the time. These are all times that you can practice if you will start with the simple technique of finding the gap. Finding the gap. Now, the other technique we talked about last week, I'm going to talk a little bit more about it today, and then I'm going to give you a reference to a resource. If you really want to dig into it, it's not the kind of thing that we can cover adequately in a short time. But last week we talked also about a practice of turning your attention to the third eye, up between the eyebrows, mostly closing your eyes, rolling your eyes up, bringing your attention to that third eye. Right? The pineal gland is up in that area. And this represents a spiritual center. Right? It is something that responds to our attention. And as we bring our attention to that third eye, it makes it easier for us to become the observer or the witness. You see, when we are asleep and we are in a deep sleep, and when children are in a deep sleep, our eyes naturally roll up to that place. There, as I mentioned last week, there are certain physiological things that we can do to help stop that monkey mind from running around looking at all the different windows and focusing on awakening from the dream. And one of them is to bring our attention to that third eye. That it just seems to have a stilling effect. It seems to allow us to quickly move from the actor to the audience, to the observer. Now, I also find that if you take the tip of your tongue and put it up to the roof of your mouth, to the palate of your mouth while you're doing that, that kind of helps. That kind of helps to make that shift into the observer. Now, as I mentioned last week, when we're doing that, what the sutras tell us is that while we're doing that, that the energy of life enters in to that third eye. They call it the prana, P-R-A-N-A, prana of life. It enters in. That while we're breathing in, we're not only breathing in air, but we are breathing in energy, and the energy comes in through this spot on our forehead. And we can feel it. We can imagine that we can feel it, and we can start to feel it. So where we're going to take that next is when you're falling asleep, when you're drifting off to sleep. So you think of what happens every night. You lay down in bed, you close your eyes, and suddenly you've completely lost consciousness. You're not consciously aware of anything. Part of you is, right? If there's a noise, you'll wake up. If you're in an uncomfortable position, you'll eventually get the message, hey, I'm laying on my arm, I better move. But for the most part, we are completely unconscious. And yet this thing that we call the divine, this thing that God is pure consciousness aware of itself. The mystics call this the blue light of consciousness. Pure consciousness aware of itself. See, when you and I first learned to meditate, we learned to meditate by focusing on externals. We count from 1 to 5. We listen over and over to an incantation of Om, for example. We focus our attention on a candle. Everything is focused outside of us, or something else. But eventually we can learn that consciousness can simply be aware of itself. Pure consciousness aware of itself. This is the blue light consciousness, the blue light meditation. So what we can do is, as we are drifting off to sleep, if we will bring our attention to that same spot, to that third eye, and feel the connection of the energy between where it enters the third eye and in our heart, kind of bring it to our love, bring love into the equation, right? So love is the experience of unity. Love is the ultimate reality. But if we can bring ourselves into that spot as we are falling asleep, we can remain the observer, we can remain conscious even while the body is asleep. We can just be aware of being aware. Be aware of being aware. It's not an easy technique. I'm not going to tell you you're going to lay down tonight and do it. But it is something that you can give your intention to. It is something you can give your attention to. It is something that you can practice. And what this does is it helps us to become the observer, and it helps us to remain the observer as the body sleeps, so that as a dream arises, we are now aware that there is a dream going on. We are now aware that what is happening is not reality, but it is in fact a dream. And we can observe the dream, and if we want to, we can direct the course of the dream. We can choose how to react. So this is a perfect opportunity for our spiritual practice then, because then we can choose how we will react and respond in the dream. We know it's just a dream. We know it's not reality. We can respond with love to everyone and everything, and drop all of our normal safeguards and say, well, gee, if I respond with love to everybody and everything, somebody might take advantage of me. Well, in a dream, so what if they do? But maybe they can't, you see. So we can practice behaving as the spiritual beings that we want to be as we direct the course of our dreams, as we become aware that this is only a dream. Now, that practice, that entire practice of lucid dreaming is covered in a book that's available on the Internet Archive, and it's called The Tibetan Yoga of Dreams and Sleep. The Tibetan Yoga of Dreams and Sleep. And it's very detailed and goes into, all sorts of instructions on the technique of how to do this. In the West, Stephen LaBarge out at Sanford University in California has started a sleep laboratory, and the technique there is called lucid dreaming. And Patricia Garfield also wrote a book. If you want any of these references, you can just, the video will be on YouTube, and you can just go back and play the video and find them. But here in the West, we call it lucid dreaming. In Tibet, they call it the yoga of dreams and sleep. We have 8 hours a night for most of us that we could be doing spiritual practice, that we could learn to be the observer. And learning how to be the observer in our dreams is a way of giving ourselves more time to practice. But in addition to that, what happens to us is the carryover is that during the day, we become aware that what appears to be so real to us is really only an experience of consciousness. That we are not the victims of our thoughts and our emotions, but we have a choice as to which thoughts and emotions we want to respond to and how we want to respond to them. we start to become more aware of our own spiritual nature in directing the course of our lives, you see. We start to become mindful at every moment. What's happening right now? Am I awake or am I dreaming? What do I want to have happen now? How do I feel about what's happening now? We become more in control of our own lives and our own experience. So I invite you, these are just 4 simple techniques on attentiveness that I took from Osho's book on the Sutras of Patanjali. And what do they say it is? It is called the Book of Secrets. It is available in its entirety on the internet at one of Osho's websites. Find a practice that appeals to you. Find something that's going to be easy to start with, something that you are going to stick with, whether it be counting breaths, whether it be finding a gap in the breaths, whether it's going to be remaining the conscious observer as your body drifts into sleep. Whatever it is, you must find one that will keep you engaged, and then you must engage in it. And as you engage in it, if you find that that one is no longer working for you, find another, find another, find another. The point is that you must awaken. You must set the intention to awaken. You must give your attention to discovering the practices, the things that will help you to awaken, and then you must do those things. So this is just kind of like a quick start, a couple of different techniques. As I say, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there are 111 different techniques. There are many different kinds of practice. There are many different kinds of meditation. But the importance of the practice is that it helps us to move beyond the intellect. It moves us from our head to our heart. It gets us out of thinking about it to actually being it. To awaken from the dream, to practice the present. This is your dream, and you are the only one who can decide when and how to awaken. It is a decision that each and every one of us comes to eventually. But if now is your time to do that, then I invite you to do it sincerely. Others have gone before us. Others have laid out the trail of breadcrumbs. We must find what works for us, and we must begin at once. There's a famous quote by the Buddha. You'll see it appear on Facebook from time to time. It says, "The problem is you think you have time. The problem is you think you have time." Each of us only has 24 hours in a day. The only way that we are going to break out of the dream is through our practice. We can practice with our breath all day long. We can practice in our sleep all night long. But we must have the intention, the desire, and we must give our intention to learning and doing the things that we need to do in order to make that practice a reality. So I invite you to do that. I invite you to find the book, The Tibetan Yoga of Dreams and Sleep, on the internet and start to read it. It is not an easy read, but it is a very good read. Practice with your breath. Every time you think of it, practice with your breath. Set a little reminder on your watch to go off every 15 minutes to beep. And when it goes off, you can just ask yourself, now, was I paying attention to my breath? If not, just go back to the gap. Go back to the gap. Divine love has created us out of itself. It has allowed us the luxury of determining when and how we will awaken. I think now is the time for us. We have the tools. The question is, do we have the desire? Are we willing to direct our attention? I hope so. And if not, then whenever the time is right, the time will be right. But if it is now, let's get started. And so it is.